the rudder! Raise the sails! Raise the sails!
Captain, an unidentified ship is approaching. Over.
Roger. Wait, is that an Enterprise sales solution?
Reach sales professionals, not professional sailors. With LinkedIn ads, you can target the right people by industry, job title, and more. Start converting your B2B audience today. Spend $250 on your first campaign and get a free $250 credit for the next one. Get started today at linkedin.com/campaign. Terms and conditions apply.
They got Willa. They got my daughter. I need to find her.
From acclaimed director Paul Thomas Anderson.
You can save that girl.
Today, experience what is being called the best movie of the year.
This is the end of the line. Not for you.
Leonardo DiCaprio, Sean Penn, Benicio del Toro, Tiana Taylor, Chase Infinity.
Let's go!
Here I come. One battle after another. Now playing only in theaters. Experience it in IMAX. Rated R. Under 17, not admitted without parent.
You can't hide.
This episode is presented by State Farm. Having insurance isn't the same as having State Farm. It's like expecting the leadership of a team captain on the football field, but getting a sea captain. You wouldn't settle for just anything for your team. Shouldn't it be the same for your insurance? So don't settle for just any insurance when you can go with a leader. State Farm. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there.
Hello and welcome to the Paddock and The Pavilion with me, your host, Stephen Wallis. Today I'm joined once again by the master of suspense and intrigue, Felix Francis. We'll be discussing the background to his new racing thriller, Dark Horse, how the story came about, the research behind it, and the return of one of his most popular characters, Sid Halley. And once you've heard this episode, I'm sure you'll want to go out and buy a copy of Dark Horse for yourself. Hello, Felix. Welcome back to the Paddock and the Pavilion.
Thank you, Stephen. Lovely to be here.
Well, last time we spoke, it was episode 295, when you were in your element with Syndicate. How are you ahead of the release of Dark Horse, your latest racing thriller?
Well, looking forward to that in 2 weeks' time. But I'm already working on the next one, of course. Haven't got a title for that yet. But no, Dark Horse was the book I've been working on since this time last year, and I'm very happy with it. So it'll be out I hope it'll be out soon, and I hope that everyone enjoys reading it.
I'm sure they will. I certainly did. I thought you were in a different stage at the moment, that you were just in the stage of promoting the current book, not onto the next one.
You get on to the next one as soon as the other one's finished. My deadline is the 1st of April. I'm not sure who in the publishers thought that was funny. But as soon as the manuscript goes in on the 1st of April, that's not the end of it. I've then got the edit, the copy edit, and then the American copy edit and the proofreading from both sides of the Atlantic. It probably doesn't go to press until June. And by then I'm beginning to think that I've got to write another one. I've signed the contract and I've taken money for it. So I've got to do it. And the writing will start in earnest at the beginning of October. So I'm at the moment deep in thought and spending sleepless nights trying to work out a story, which is the most difficult bit, is to think up the story. The writing, once you've got the story, is, well, I won't say it comes easily, but it's easier than trying to think up a story in the first place.
What's the difference in the American edit then? Is it just the words, or?
No, it's the copy edit. The Americans, well, they don't understand betting for a start, so they're forever asking for more explanation. In one book, I had a character who did anti-post betting, and then on the day or of the race, they would then lay the same horse they'd backed, so that they would, if the horse won, they would collect big, and if the horse, but they'd have to pay out a little bit, and if the horse lost, they would lose their anti-post stake, but they'd make it back on their lay on the day. And I called this a bet to nothing, Well, the American copy editor changed it to a bet on nothing, which so it obviously didn't quite understand the betting principle, and I had to be very careful because the Americans are not too au fait with betting. In fact, in one of my books, I had a character who used lots of credit cards from which accounts to allow Americans to gamble on things like Betfair and what have you. So, but there is one editor based in England who edits for both the US and the UK version, but the copy editors always want to change things. I don't change all the spelling for the American version. The American publishers are quite keen on keeping the English spelling. So things like center have an RE and color has a U in it. But there are certain words they really don't understand. To put things in the boot of a car, I do change that to a trunk because I don't want it to disrupt the flow of the words. So there are a few things which are changed in the American version, but not many. There used to be a lot more, but not so many these days.
And this book is number 20, is that right? 19?
No, it's number 19, but thank you.
You're working on 20.
Sometimes feels like number 20. This is my number 19. But when you bear in mind that Dad and Mum together wrote 38, I'm only halfway there. So if I write another 19 to catch them up, I'll be 91 by the time I get to that stage if I do one a year. And I can't see that happening. I always thought that 20 sounded like a good number. Now I've got to almost 20. Well, 25 sounds like a reasonable number. But thinking of a story gets more and more difficult because there are now 60 Dick Francis mysteries written by Dick and Mary and then by me. And you can't use any of those storylines again. So it gets more and more difficult.
Well, it was another Dick Francis novel that kept me up late. This time we were following two characters that normally it's just the one. So I was rooting for two characters this time, Imogen Duffy and Sid Halley. And actually it's quite a strange feeling when you read a book because you get so invested in it in a short period of time with your sort of books. And then there's almost that sadness when you're looking forward to the ending, but then there's a sadness and you haven't got something to read when you go to bed then.
Well, that's very kind of you to say so, but it's not the first Dick Francis novel that's had two first-person narrators. And in fact, part of my idea was to do an homage to Twice Shy, which my father wrote back in the early 1980s, which was two brothers. It was Jonathan and William Derry, and there were two halves to the book. In that case, there was quite a long period of many years between the two halves, and in this case, there's only 9 months. But yes, it was I like to challenge myself a bit. Sometimes I wrote a book called Iced, where I did 2 time zones intermingled through the book. And I wrote one of them in the present tense and one in the past tense. And it was all the same character, but he was recounting different times of his life. And that was quite complicated. And so I sort of want to challenge myself to do things slightly differently. And this time I did it in 2 ways. One is I have 2 first-person narrators. And secondly, one of them is a girl. And well, she's early 20s. She's 21. So it's, put myself here. I am in my 70s, putting myself, a 70-year-old male, putting myself into the mind of a 20-year-old girl. So I spent a lot of time talking to my stepdaughter about what she would say and what she would do. But yes, it was fun, and I think it works, and people have been kind enough to say they think it works. So I hope the readers enjoy reading it.
On that subject, then, no spoilers, but can you give listeners a brief synopsis of Dark Horse?
Well, the first part of it is Imogen Duffy. She's a young, certainly up and coming jump jockey, and she's Irish, and the book starts at Cheltenham. She's picked up a spare ride due to an injury of another jockey in the champion chase, and lo and behold, she does rather well in it. And it is so that puts her on the map a bit. But the story revolves around the fact that she has a controlling and coercive boyfriend who's also an Irish jockey, who gets very jealous of her success. And she's broken it off with him, and he says to her that he'd rather kill her than let her leave him. So a lot of it is about coercive control and what happens after a breakup of a relationship. Imogen gets an offer of a job in England, so comes over from England and works in the top stable in Lambourne, and then, to her horror, she finds that her ex-boyfriend, Liam Carson, has followed her over and is working just down the road. And Liam sets out to extract revenge for leaving him both on and off the track by trying to put her across the rail and through the wing of a fence. And anyway, Imogen is living a life in fear, and she does what she can to try and get away from him. And then her father, in desperation, goes to Sid Halley and asks for his help in the second part of the book. And the second part of the book is Sid trying to work out what the hell's going on, which involves a trial. So Sid spends his time in the courtroom with the barristers, setting out arguments and trying to get a result which everyone is happy with. Well, certainly which he's happy with.
So where did the idea come from then? You're always thinking of new ideas. Where did this one
Well,
come from?
the idea really came because my publishers were pushing me to write a paragraph about what the next book was about. And I had this idea of having a young female jockey, steeplechase jockey, loosely based on Rachel Blackmore, but not exactly. Then Rachel had been up and coming and became a household name from Tipperary, and so I thought that it would be nice to have another jockey doing the same thing. And I was being pushed for a storyline, and I went to bed one night and I lay in bed and awake thinking, what can I do? And I'd been looking at, you see on the news, every day or every week, at least every week, there are stories of ex-boyfriends murdering their partners. Do you know that in this country, at least 2 women are killed every week by an ex-intimate partner? It is the most common cause of murder of females. Is not by strangers. In fact, only 10% of female victims are killed by strangers in this country, whereas something like 60% are killed by former or current intimate partners. And in America, the numbers are even worse. There are 30 women every week killed in America by a current or former intimate partner. And reading that desperate statistics, I thought, I've got to write a book about this. I've got to include this in a book. This is what the world is, and I try and write books which include how the world is as of today.
And as you said, Sid Halley is back.
Yes, he is. This is his. I'm not sure. This is his sixth or seventh outing, um, and but Sid is very lucky because he doesn't age as quickly as the rest of us. I mean, he first appeared in his 30s in 1965, and here he is in the 2020s, and he's still only in his 50s. So lucky old Sid. But it's not written as if it was all those years ago. It's very much written as a modern today thriller, and Sid is, as he has been in the last couple of books, a very reluctant investigator, but is put in a position where he can't really say no. And he finds that not only are people not answering his questions, but someone's threatening his life. And it was one thing we know about Sid Halley is that the more you threaten him, the more you beat him up, the harder he comes after you. And so it was lovely it was like slipping on an old, an old comfortable warm glove to write about Sid again. I've always said that Sid has probably had his time, but he keeps reappearing in my head and saying, "What about me? What about me?" And I'm not saying I won't write another Sid. In fact, I'm sure I will, but it might be a few years, and he might get the whole book to himself next time.
You must know his character well, though. Did you have to go? Do you have to go back and read all the books that he's featured in?
Well, he appeared, as I said, in 1965 in Odds Against. He then reappeared in 1979 in a book called Whip Hand. And my father had no intention of bringing Sid back, really. But ITV ran a series on television called The Racing Game, which starred Mike Gwilym as Sid Halley. And my father said that Mike came to stay for the weekend during the filming. A break in filming, Mike came and stayed with my parents. And when he handed him his drink of whiskey, it was just like handing a glass of whiskey to Sid Halley. And so he felt he had to write another book about him. So he wrote Whip Hand in 1979. And then, due to popular demand, Sid came back again in Come to Grief in 1996. And then when I took over, I thought the easiest way of becoming Dick Francis and writing in the Dick Francis style was to write about Sid Halley. So he appeared in Under Orders in 2006. And then I brought him back in Refusal, where he didn't want to investigate anything anymore, but the other party was not having it. And then he appeared again in Hands Down a few years ago. So this is his seventh outing. And I'm now quite used to Sid because Dad wrote three of them and I've written three of them. And this is my fourth. So you might say I've adopted Sid as my own. And I'm sure that if all being well and I'm still here and I'm in need of a storyline in 2 or 3 years' time, I think Sid might make another appearance. I'm very fond of him and I love the little quirks about his character, which I try and bring to the fore in the book. And so, yeah, Sid may be back, and people like him. Everyone says to me, last year when I wrote Syndicate, they said, "Is it a Sid Halley book?" And I said, "No," and there was a sort of look of disappointment on people's faces. So I've sort of half looked after them this time.
So was Dick Francis, the former champion jockey himself, writing about himself when he started Sid Halley?
Well, I don't know. Sid is forced to retire in Odds Against because he has he had a bad fall, well, a gentle fall, but a horse with an old racing plate which had sharpened into a blade landed on his hand, on his left hand, and left him completely disabled in his left hand. So he had to give up racing, and it was he joined a private detective agency, really because the private detective agency owner felt sorry for him, and he was a racing man, so he gave him a job, and he sat around doing nothing most of the time. The first line of Odds Against is, let me think. And it was all about Sid being being shot in the stomach. Oh yes, I was never very keen on my job until the day I got shot and nearly lost it along with my life. And the big question in the first page is whether Sid could survive the night with his blood dripping through a crack in the linoleum floor into the room below, and because all the telephones were not working because there was no one on the switchboard. Times have changed. So Sid has been around a long time, and I'm very fond of him, and he will always return. And I hope that perhaps we'll say maybe 2, maybe 3 years' time, Sid will be back. So
He's even got his own Wikipedia page, Sid Halley.
Has he really?
Yes, I found it. Yeah.
And what does it say?
It talks about the books he's in, the fact that he was a champion jockey, and yeah, it's quite a lengthy Wikipedia page for a fictional character.
Yeah, well, there are a lot of those around. I never trust what you read on Wikipedia. It is maybe where an author's research starts, but you always take everything you read on there with a pinch of salt. I know people that change their own Wikipedia page just for the laugh.
Now, you mentioned earlier about a possible court case. Did you do lots of research? Did you go and watch courts in action?
Going to a Crown Court in this country is the greatest free theatre you will ever see. I mean, it is just amazing. I spent quite a lot of time in researching the book, my book way back, which was called Silks, which was about a barrister who was also an amateur jockey, hence the title Silks. And I went and spent quite a lot of time at the Old Bailey watching trials. I've also been to Oxford Crown Court for Silks, and we've had Oxford Crown Court in a couple of other books. So this time it's at Reading. And I went to spend a couple of days at Reading. One of them, it was absolutely bucketing down with rain. I got absolutely soaked getting to the courtroom. But so I spent most of the day sitting there with my clothes steaming as I watched the case. But it is fascinating to watch. Everyone is free to go to sit in the public gallery and watch and listen. I mean, things don't move as quickly in reality as they do in my books, because if you wrote a book in the same time zone as a trial really takes place, it would become rather turgid. So I speed everything up a bit, but I don't change very much, and it's really the most fascinating thing. So yes, I spent quite a lot of time at Reading Crown Court, and I've spent time in other Crown Courts watching, and also in coroners' courts. They're, as I said, they're great free theatre, and they're wonderful for research.
Because it's important when you're writing a book to be accurate and get all the procedure right, isn't it?
Yes. I mean, you take a little bit of liberty here and there, speeding everything up, as I said, but you've got to get certain things right. And I write a lot about horse racing, and the horse racing has to be right. There's nothing worse than, calling as I've seen in other books, a hurdle race being described as a stakes race. Perhaps most of the general public wouldn't know the difference, but those in racing know the difference. And racing, I feel that the people who are involved in racing are my core audience. And the last thing I want to do is to alienate them by getting things wrong. I mean, the first person I send a book to every year is my brother Merrick, who is chairman of the Lambourn Trainers Association, and he's run Lambourn Racehorse Transport for the last 30 years. He knows more about horse racing, and he's forgotten more about horse racing than I've known. So I always send him the book first, and he usually spots the errors. I made a bit of a mistake a few books ago where I had a man claiming a £5 allowance in the Grand National, which is not allowed. And only one person spotted it, and it was changed for the paperback. But mostly the racing I try and get right. And yes, in court, I mean, in this book, I had a barrister read it. I mean, I spent a lot of time with him talking through things. And then I got him to read the book, and afterwards, to check that everything was all right. Sometimes he would say, well, that's not how I would do it. But you always have to say, it's not what you would do, it's what could happen.
The spirit of innovation is deeply ingrained in America, and Google is helping Americans innovate in ways both big and small. From improving emergency response times to protecting against cyber attacks, local, state, and federal governments are innovating with Google AI. This is a new era of American innovation. Find out more at g.co/American innovation.
For a limited time at McDonald's, get a Big Mac extra value meal for $8. That means 2 all-beef patties, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, pickles, onions on a sesame seed bun, and medium fries, and a drink. We may need to change that jingle.
Prices and participation may vary.
Tonight, turn down the noise of the day and focus on the rest with AGZ, the nightly drink for winding down and resting up. New from AG1. AGZ supports your body's natural sleep cycle with clinically studied key herbs, adaptogens, and minerals in amounts supported by research. And no melatonin, helping you wake feeling rested. Wind down, rest up with AGZ. Learn more at drinkagz.com.
Just changing tack a bit, we've had several chats now, Felix, about your books, and one thing we've never really covered is how Dick Francis, the champion jockey, became a famous racing thriller writer.
Well, it's really quite simple. If you want to be a successful writer, ride Devon Lock in the 1956 Grand National. My father was champion jockey in 1953-54. It was the year I was born. So for me, people ask, what's it like to grow up with a famous father? And the answer is, I don't know how it isn't, because my father was famous in the year I was born for being champion jockey. But the one event in his life which made the greatest difference to his life was the ride on Devon Lock in the 1956 Grand National. If anyone's listening who hasn't seen it, then just put Devon Lock into YouTube and you will see the film. The horse was owned by the Queen Mother. It had run all the way around the Grand National course twice, jumped 30 fences. It just had 40 yards to go and was 4 or 5 lengths in front. It looked like a royal win was a certainty, and the horse collapsed. I mean, the horse collapsed because my father said that the noise frightened it. And, someone wins the Grand National every year, but to lose it in such dramatic fashion was strange indeed. It was rare. And, I mean, it wasn't on the television, but the Pathé News film was shown. Everyone saw it in the cinemas. Anyway, my father had hoped to ride Devon Lock in the 1957 Grand National to put to rights what had happened in 1956. But the horse broke down, and that means it pulled a tendon and was retired in January 1957. And my father had a bad fall, broke his wrist, ruptured his spleen in in early 1957. So when Devon Locke retired, my father announced live on television with Peter Dimmock that he was retiring. And John Juno from the London Sunday Express obviously saw this and got in touch with him and said, if you're retiring, would you write half a dozen articles for my newspaper about the current racing scene? And John even said, we'll get someone else to write it if you'll put your name on it. And my father said, well, if it's going to have my name on it, I'm going to write it. So he started writing for the Sunday Express. Those six articles went on for 16 years, full employment. And Dad was already writing his autobiography because a literary agent had said that the Devon Locke episode is a good peg on which to hang an autobiography. I mean, nowadays, every sportsman writes an autobiography, probably when they're only about 21. But in those days, it was rare. So, and my father, racing is called the sport of kings. And my father got permission from the Queen Mother, who he was friends with, because after Devon Locke, they became lifelong friends. He said, could he call it the sport of queens? So his autobiography was called The Sport of Queens. As Dad said in later life, perhaps he wouldn't call it that these days. Anyway, John Juno heard about this, asked him to write the articles, and the book came out. It was a great success. And Dad was now writing for the Sunday Express. He'd moved from being one of us to one of them. John Juno was the very first newspaper editor to get ex-sportsmen to write about their sport. He got Dennis Compton to write about cricket. He got Danny Blanchflower to write about football. And he had Dick Francis writing about racing. And so Dad moved from being one of us to one of them in racing, on the racecourse. He moved from the jockey's changing room to the press room. And there was no trust between them. And I'm very proud of my father that he broke down that relationship. He never wrote anything in the newspaper that any of the jockeys told him he shouldn't write. And so began this movement between the media and the participants. And anyway, he became a newspaper man. That went on for 16 years. But after 4 or 5 years, my mother said to him, well, it pays all right, but it doesn't pay as well as being a top sportsman. So you always said you were going to write a mystery story based around racing, and now's the time. We've got the carpets are wearing out, the cars are beginning to knock. We've got 2 children to educate, so he sat down and, with her help, the 2 of them did it together. They wrote Dead Cert, and that was published in January 1962 in the UK. And it did all right. And then there was another book every year for the rest of the 20th century. And the last one was that they did was published in the year 2000, called Shattered. And my God, it was well named because they were shattered by the experience. And then they retired, and there wasn't a book for 6 years. And lo and behold, there was suddenly another one, because the agent said to me, what we need is a new hardback. And he said he was going to ask an existing crime writer to write a Dick Francis novel. And I said, well, before you ask anyone else, I'd like to have a go. And he told me I had 2 months to write 2 chapters, and then we'll see, which meant that he'd get my permission to ask who he wanted. And I wrote the 2 chapters, sent them in, and he said, well, you better get on and finish it. And that's where Under Orders came from. And I've been writing one every year since.
Well, thank you for that story. So really, losing the Grand National was what set it all up then, in that dramatic fashion.
If he hadn't lost the Grand National in the most defining moment of his life, I would not be talking to you now, Stephen. I'm absolutely sure of that. I'd be a retired physics teacher, and probably happy. But I am very happy to be talking to you, and I'm very, very happy to now be considered the author of the Dick Francis novels.
So the success of the early success and the continued success of the Dick Francis novels helped the education of Felix and Merrick then?
Absolutely, yes, indeed it did. And it became the family business. And my mother always referred to it as the family business. I mean, there's a book called Twice, in the book Twice Shy, there's a physics teacher, that was me. There was in the book Driving Force, there's a man who runs a transport business, that was Merrick. My cousin is an architect, and that was in what was it? The Danger. There was my uncle was a wine importer, and that was in Proof. I mean, it really was the family business. If anyone in the family had an interesting job, my father would talk to you. I want to tell you about an interesting day. I was at Cheltenham races with my parents. I was teaching at Cheltenham Grammar School at the time, teaching physics at Cheltenham Grammar School. And we went to the races on the Saturday afternoon. And I was driving my parents there. And we got invited into a box. I can't remember whose box it was. And we went in there, we were chatting and having a drink and everything. Well, there they were. I was the driver. And then we went out. As always, my father wanted to leave before the last race to avoid the traffic. So we went out as the last race was being run and got in the car, and I just started the engine. And my father, my mother was sat next to me in the front, and my father in the back. And he said, "Hold on a minute, I'm just going back inside." So my mother and I looked at each other and said, "What's this?" So Dad got out of the car. He went back into the race course, back into the box to find the man that he'd been talking to. And about an hour later, the traffic was now all gone. Dad finally arrived back with a smile on his face and sat in the car. I said, "Where have you been?" He said, "I've been talking to a banker." He got introduced to a merchant banker. And on the way out of the race course, he had an idea. So he went back and he went into the merchant banker and he asked him would his bank lend him £1 million to buy a stallion? I mean, £1 million was a lot of money in the 1980s, and the banker didn't realize he was asking for research, so started going through him all the procedures for borrowing £1 million, and the book Banker came out of that one event at Cheltenham Racecourse, and that's how storylines appear. They suddenly get an idea and you go and see someone, you don't necessarily ask the right question, but you ask the right person. Even if you ask them the wrong question, you can get an idea, and that's how storylines come about. And so living life with my parents was very exciting.
And the book names, they're always short names. Is that deliberate? It's a bit like Harry Herbert's horses at Highclere. They're always short names as well.
Yes, absolutely. They are indeed. And Harry Herbert, of course, was great help for me in No Reserve. In Syndicate, which is about the Syndicate. Yeah, I mean, the traditional Dick Francis, Felix Francis title has a double meaning. We have had a few three-word titles: In the Frame, Come to Grief, Guilty Not Guilty. But we've had lots of one-word titles and quite a lot of two-word titles. And they're always titles which should have a double meaning. I mean, going back to the beginning, Dead Cert. I mean, the title is evocative. It draws you in to read the book. For Kicks, Odds Against, Flying Finish, Blood Sport, Rat Race. There are some magnificent titles. My father was always very keen on first lines. The first line of For Kicks is, "The Earl of October drove into my life in a light blue Holden that had seen better days, and death and destruction tagged along for the ride. He spent time in bookshops watching people pick books off the shelf, and they would read the blurb on the inside cover, and then they would look at the first line. And if the first line was fairly mundane, they'd put the books back on the shelf. And he said, you've got to grab them with the very first line. And the first line of Dark Horse is, "Don't you bloody touch me." So, you've got to grab people by the, well, I won't say by the neck. That's a bit too close for comfort, but certainly by the shoulders to get them to not put the book back on the shelf and to read it. But, I mean, we try. I mean, it doesn't always work that we have a title which is to do with racing and to do with not racing. But it seems to work so far.
You're listening to The Paddock and The Pavilion, probably the only podcast that covers both horse racing and cricket, with me, Stephen Wallis. Felix last featured on The Paddock and The Pavilion in episode 295, In His Element with Syndicate. You can download that show along with nearly 400 others on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Spotify, and on our YouTube channel. It's that time again to recommend a book for us to read from the Dick Francis series. And we must pick one of the Sid Halley ones.
Well, I mean, I think all of them stand up. But if you want a book which others have thought was exceptional, in 1979 there was a book called Whip Hand, which was a Sid Halley book by Dick Francis. It won the Crime Writers Association Gold Dagger Award for the best mystery novel of the year. In the UK. It also won the Edgar Allan Poe Award for the best mystery novel of the year in the United States. So if you're going to start somewhere, start with Whip Hand. And once you've read that, I'm sure you'll be wanting to read all the others too. And that would be great. It's a book I've read time and again. And when I don't read it, I listen to Tony Britton speaking it on the audio book. And I've often arrived at a destination and sat in the car for the next 20 minutes to listen, because you can't bear not to listen to it. And I know the story. So if you don't know the story, then I would recommend Whip Hand. And then when you've read that, you might read all of them.
Right, I'll try that one out. By the time this podcast goes out, you will have been on the old book signings, because we've got the launch on the 24th of September. How much are you looking forward to that, and how much do you look forward to the book launches every year?
I've said before that the book launch is the best day of my life. I have a party. I invite a lot of my friends, some reviewers, and others involved in the book trade, but at least 60 or 70% of the people in the room are dear friends of mine. And it's a great night. It is the culmination of a year's work. I mean, writing books is something you do very much in isolation. My father always said that, winning a race gave you a great high. Winning a big race gave you a great high, but that high was very short term. You might ride in the race after the Grand National and have a crashing fall and end up with a broken collarbone in Fazakerley Hospital, which he has done often. But writing a book, the pleasure is much long lasting. And that night is the beginning of that long lasting pleasure, because you get reviews, you get lots of, there's 120, 130 people there. A lot of them will buy a copy of the new book. they'll go away, and for the next 2 or 3 weeks, I will get, people saying, thank you for the party, read the book, really enjoyed it. It is a very long-lasting and warm feeling, but it is the culmination. I mean, your whole year's work, you put your whole year's work out for scrutiny on one day. And in some respects, it's terrifying. And in other respects, it's very gratifying. But you work very much alone. I don't send chapters in to my editor as I go along. I don't, my editor and my publishers don't see anything until I'm satisfied it's finished. The only person that reads it prior to that is my wife. And if I can get it past her, I can get it past anybody.
And is it an evening when you feel you're representing not just Felix Francis, but Dick Francis as well?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the book, it has Felix Francis' Dark Horse on the front, but it also has written across the bottom a Dick Francis novel. Now, that is my choice, not the publisher's choice, because I feel that he and indeed my mother are as much a part of my books as I now feel a part of all of theirs. I feel that I have an ownership of all those books way back to Dead Cert. Dead Cert was written when I was 8. Someone said to me once, did you write all of them? Well, I was only 8 when that first one was and I may have been a fairly precocious 8-year-old, but I wasn't writing novels at 8. But I still feel that they are a part of me, and as I feel that all my books are a part of him. When I first started writing, I had a sort of a committee. It wasn't an official; it was an unofficial committee consisting of my father's editor, my father's publisher, and my father's agent. And for the first 4 or 5 books that I wrote in the Dick Francis series, this unofficial committee was sent the book beforehand, and if they didn't give it the thumbs up to go ahead with the publication, it would never have seen the light of day. It was there's no way I wanted to do any damage to the reputation of the Dick Francis novels. I mean, the greatest thing that people say to me, and quite a lot of them do, is that they can't see the join. They can't see, I mean, apart from a review in the Sunday Times when Dead Heat came out, and he said, well, I can see which bits Felix wrote and which bits Dick wrote, because it was the first book that had my name on the cover. And both my father and I thought that was very funny, because both of us knew that I'd written all of it. But I feel that I am maintaining the tradition and maintaining the reputation. And I would never do anything which I felt was diminishing the reputation of those wonderful stories that Dick and Mary Francis created in the last century. And if I can go on writing books which I feel and my agent and my publisher feel are enhancing that reputation, then as long as I can and people want to read them, then I will go on doing it.
Oh, thank you for that. I wanted to mention that the fact that I love that in the early part of the book, when Imogen was a jockey, I noticed you inserted a line when Imogen went past the Dick Francis statue at Aintree.
Well, you've got to have some fun. And also, I thought you were going to say, yeah, but of course, that statue is hugely symbolic for the Francis family, and indeed a lot of other people. But it was a great day when the Princess Royal unveiled it. But I thought you were going to say that when they were walking the course, and the trainer says, when they get to the chair, he says, you just have to throw your heart over and catch it on the other side. Now, that line, which is in the book, was a line my father said to Tommy Stack. Actually, it was at Beecher's Brook, but never mind. I changed it to the chair. But that is what like riding in the Grand National fence is like, especially in the old days when they were much harder and higher and firmer than they are now. My father said, well, you just have to throw your heart over and catch it on the other side. And that stuck in my head. And I'm so proud to have put that line in this book, which is a line he said to Tommy Stack, who, of course, Tommy Stack red rum to win the third Grand National, his third Grand National then. And so you've got to, Stephen, you have to play a bit. You have to have a little bit of fun. And to put the Dick Francis statue in on her way, Imogen went past it on her way to be interviewed for ITV Racing. You know, come on, have a bit of fun.
Oh, I liked it.
Oh, good. I'm glad you did.
Thank you very much, Felix, again for being on the Paddock and the Pavilion. The best of luck with the book. The best of luck with all the book signings and the launch on the 24th of September, even though this podcast will go out after the launch.
Well, Stephen, it's always a great pleasure to talk to you, and thank you very much for having me on again.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
You just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other job sites. With Indeed sponsored jobs, your post jumps to the top of the page for your relevant candidates, so you can reach the people you want faster. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed have 45% more applications than non-sponsored jobs. Don't wait any longer. Speed up your hiring right now with Indeed. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/kidsandfamily. Just go to Indeed.com/kidsandfamily right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Indeed is all you need.